Call the regular council meeting for the town of Cobalt to order at 6:30 p.m. on September 17th, 2024. First item on our agenda is we have an oath of office for our new councillor. And and Rennie, do you want to come up?
Stand or sit?
Stand.
Okay. I, Rennie LaFleur, having been appointed to the office of the councillor and the municipality of the corporation of the town of Cobalt, do solemnly promise to and declare that I will truly, faithfully, and impartially exercise this office to the best of my knowledge and ability. I have not received and will not receive any payment or reward or promise thereof for the exercise of this office in a biased, corrupt, or in any other improper manner. I will enclose any pecuniary, pardon me, interest, direct or indirect, in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. I will be faithful, bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, King of Canada, and I make this solemn promise and declaration consistently believing it to be true and knowing that it is of the same force and effect as if made under oath. So sign this here.
And join us at the table and welcome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, item 3, disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. 4, public meetings, there are none. 5, deputations delegation. 5.1, Daniel Gerard, Kemp Elliott Blair, presentation of the 2023 audit. Daniel?
Okay, so I think everybody remembers me except maybe the new council from tonight. So I'm your auditor. We finally have your financial statements complete. We've had the drafts complete now for several months. But there was a report that needed to be completed by an engineering firm related to asset retirement obligations. And I'll go through that a little bit more in detail when we get to that part of the financial statements. But that's what caused the delay this year. So the report finally came in 2 weeks ago. We were able to finish up. So now we'll meet with council and kind of go through everything. Now it does relate to the 2023 financial statement. So again, we're September now, so just keep that in mind that it's 9 months old. So the first part of the financial statements that we're going to look at is actually page 23, note 19. So because I've mentioned this before, your financial statements are required to be prepared under PSAB, which is the Public Sector Accounting Board regulations. But the way that you budget is different. So there's a disconnect between municipalities and accountants at the moment. So we convert your statement of operations under PSAB to the way that you budget. So when we're reviewing it with you, we're comparing apples to apples, and it makes a little bit more sense. So things that are a little bit different between the two are capital expenditures. So under PSAB, we have to capitalize and amortize your capital expenditures. In your budget, it's an expense. If you spend money on a new vehicle or a building or something, it's in the year that you actually purchased it that it becomes an expense. Long-term debt is also different. So repayment of long-term debt is an expense for your budget, but it is not in your real statement of operations, only the interest is. So a few differences there, but this is kind of a little bit more important for you to look at. Makes a little bit more sense, and it should help you with decision-making going forward. So the middle column is your 2023 actual. Your left is budget numbers. On the right is 2022, and it shows the activities that happened during 2023. So operating revenues, municipal taxation was $712,000. You had a rate increase of 12%, and your assessment went up slightly by about 1%. So overall, your revenues were up about 12. Water and sewer user fees, $553,000. You did have an increase of 8% in water, and you stayed at 0 for sewer. Policing fees, $365,000. The rate remained the same, but you had 11 additional units that were charged the fee. User charges, $198,156. Your building permits were up by $11,000. Provincial grants, $928,000. Your largest grant by far is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. It's your unconditional grant that you use to operate. It was $899,300, and it remained the same compared to the year before. You also had about $21,000 of NORDS funding that you used towards operating expenses, such as water main breaks and things that were not considered capital. So that number's in there as well. Federal grants, $83,000. $19,000 of that were grants received by the library. So keep in mind the library financial statements are consolidated into your financial statements since they are ultimately under the control of council. You also had $54,000 of gas tax that also got used towards water main breaks, so it was mostly considered operational, and the UV filter system. Revenue from other municipalities, $24,670. The bulk of that is water charges from Coleman for about $21,000. Investment income is the interest you've earned on your bank account throughout the year, so that's about $23,000. Penalties and interest on taxes, $62,000. So your penalties and interest are higher. The majority of the reason for that is you'll see that your taxes receivable are also growing. So as the payments are coming in less, you are collecting or at least charging more interest and penalties on those. Land sales, you had one property sale for $6,500. Gain on sale of government business partnership. If you remember last year, that's when you sold, I guess you did sell your 50% share of solar Cobalt. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was an actual sale or just give it back, but anyways, it disappeared off your financial statement. So that's that reversal of the accumulated losses of that became a gain last year. So that's why that's there. Proceeds from sale of tangible capital assets, $9,596. 2 lawnmowers were sold, a 2010 Chevy Silverado, and a generator. Other $118,000, basically everything that didn't fit in one of the other categories. Most of that is Timiskaming Foundation grants, donations, that kind of stuff. So in 2023, there was a decrease in the amount of grants the library received by about $22,000. And in 2022, you had received donations for the fire truck, and there wasn't that in 2023. So that accounts for most of the difference. So total operating revenues, just over $3 million. Capital revenues, provincial grants, $181,000. Had NORD funding of $129,000, and there was SkyF funding of $52,000 that was used towards capital projects. Federal grants, $28,000 was NORD. So total revenue, capital revenues of $209,000 for total revenues of just under $3.3 million. Under expenditures, operating expenditures, general governments, everything that has to do with running the municipality itself was $722,000. So something that's been creeping up in Cobalt that wasn't an issue before is that when you're putting up properties up for tax sale, they're not selling, and they're having to vest to the town. So we had quite a few properties in the last few years where that situation has arose. And you're having to absorb that write-off of the taxes that were on the account. So although you inherit the property, you do lose that tax revenue because they're not actually going through the tax sale, like nobody's bidding on them. So you're ending up with them. The flexibility of that is it does give you the opportunity then to turn around and set whatever price you want for the property. At this point, you just want them sold because you want the assessment. So keep that in mind if you are looking at putting some of these up for sale, or if you have already, that's okay. But if you can get the assessment out of them, that's what you're looking at, because then you get a consistent tax revenue from there. But something unusual for Cobalt. Usually you're always able to recover on your properties, and we started to notice in the last few years that it's being more difficult. Also in there was council training and travel that was up by about $12,000 from the year before. Protection to persons and property stayed fairly the same as last year. Your policing, I think, was only up about 1%. Transportation services, $655,000. The big kicker in there is your transit. So you must have seen the transit. Has council seen that yet? The transit reconciliation for 2023? Or is that tonight?
tonight.
Okay, well, you'll see later. There was an increase in transit by about 50,000. And because it related to 2023 and we hadn't finished your 2023 statements, they're in there because it technically relates to 2023 even if you've just received it now. So it's like, I guess I kind of spilled the beans ahead of time, so, but you'll find out about it later. Environmental services, so that's water, sewer, garbage, 919,000. Your water expenses went up quite a bit. We'll look at an individual statement in a minute. Most of that is the way that Aqua now charges for chemicals. So your chemicals are very expensive compared to what it was before part of your contract. Health services, 155,000. Land ambulance went down by about $1,800. Otherwise, everything stayed fairly the same. Social and family services, that's everything else that has to do with the DSAB, 97,956, so it went down slightly. Recreation and cultural services, 180,000. Now the library falls into that category, and their consulting fees were up by about 40,000. That is a major increase there. Planning and development, 28,000 versus 82. You had a FedNor intern for all of 2022 and only for a little bit of 2023. Plus you spent some money on an asset management plan in 2022, which you did not in 2023. So total operating expenditures, 3.3 million. Capital expenditures, 323,000. You did some road work, some wetland stuff, snow blower, public works garage still had some expenses in there, and the tech park had some work done to it. You repaid $61,000 of long-term debt for total expenditures of 3.6 million. So if we take your total revenues less your total expenses, you end up with a deficit of about 400,000. So you had budgeted for a deficit of 297, because if everybody remembers 2023, you budgeted to take from your reserves to cover that. And you actually ended up 400,000 in the hole instead of 297. So you were over 100,000 more in a bigger deficit than you were expecting. Okay, so my concern on that page is if you look at your operating revenues, so Steve, if you'll scroll up a little bit, or whoever is, just buddy. So if you look at your operating revenues of 3,087,000 and then scroll back down to your operating expenses, which is 3.3, it means your operating revenues are not covering your operating expenses, let alone capital or long-term debt. So ideally, you're supposed to have enough revenues to cover operating expenses. And that's where the shortfall is coming in. So you don't even have enough revenues to cover operating, let alone any capital projects and or repayment of long-term debt. So that's where the trouble is, and that's where it's going to continue to be that way until things sort themselves out. But if you look at last year, you had the same problem. So it's been like this for a few years now. So operating such as water, sewer, whatever services you're offering right now, you are not able to cover that with your operating revenues or your municipal taxation. And grants a lot of times, other than your municipal partnership fund, are one-time things. So they're not there and they don't repeat themselves. And your Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund doesn't look like it's going up anytime soon, or if it is, not by much. So costs are going to continue to increase. We all know that based on utilities, insurance, things like that. So your revenues need to get better in line, and it's going to take a fairly big jump for quite a few years until you get to that point. Any questions on that? Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yes.
Sorry, is this current, like we've done a budget this year? I mean, this is last year. So any increases we've made in taxes now, is this going to be different?
Yep.
So is this included in this?
No. So this would have been 2023 only, and your tax rate was up to 12, and then Steve was telling me it's 13.
For 2024 for our budget, we increased taxes 13.5%.
Yeah, and then water another 8, okay?
Yeah.
So you're consistently increasing, so you're continuing, but that means your costs have to not increase by the same amount.
So taking that into account, are we on a better track than what you're saying here? I mean,
Oh, it's hard to tell because I don't know if your operating expenses have gone up. So if you're looking from 23 to 2024 and you look at insurance, you're looking at utilities, have they gone up more or less than 13%?
But that's the increase isn't reflected in there. Sam.
Your Worship, on that right now, we're going to have a variance report for next quarter, next month. that will reflect. And as we brought forward at the halfway point, like we were on track at that time.
That's what I was
So we're going to bring that forward the next quarter at the next meeting for council to review.
I have you not seen 2024 at all yet, so.
Okay.
Any other questions on that page? No, it's clear as day. Okay, so next page in your package, excuse me, should be page 4. So this is your statement of financial position. It's the one required by PSAP, so we didn't convert this one, we didn't touch it. There's a few things in it I don't like, and they're overcomplicating things, and it's making it worse, such as asset retirement obligations, which we're going to look at in a minute. But I think it's still worth going through. Whether we decide to convert it at some point to something that makes a little more sense, I don't know, because every year they seem to add a complication to this, but we'll go through it and we'll see what comes out of it. So it says where you're at a point in time. So on December 31st, and again, this is 2023, you had $577,000 of cash in the bank. Looks healthy, but if you go down to the liabilities and you look at your accounts payable, they were $486. So if you paid everything you owed that day, you actually didn't have much left in your bank account. So it's just a timing thing on whether or not you had things paid up or not. But that's why the bank account itself still looks healthy at that point. Taxes receivable were $410,913. So that's where we're seeing an increase from the prior year. Plus we wrote off a bunch of taxes because the properties invested to the town. So there is a general increase. I don't think that's going to change. I think that's kind of the new norm. So you will have to find ways to try and promote collection, make sure that at the 2 years, which Cobalt has always been very good at going through that registration process, because at the 2-year mark, it's a lot easier to get out of debt than it is at the 3 or 4 year mark for a ratepayer. So keep going with that, and that's about all you can do at this point. If you are investing properties though, if you're able to turn them around and try to resell them, that's about all you can do, just because you want that assessment in the future. Having an empty property on your books isn't going to help much. So the quicker you can get it in somebody else's hands, the better that is for everybody involved. Accounts receivable, $99,236. Accounts receivable and accounts payable will fluctuate from year to year. A lot of it's dependent on capital projects, timing of payments and receipts, that kind of stuff. The receivables are quite low this year. Of the $99,000, $53,000 of that is your HST rebate. So you get a rebate on the HST that you pay on your expenses, and the rebate gets filed after the end of the year, so you just hadn't received it yet. In the last year, it was such a big amount because you had an insurance claim. You were waiting for the money from the insurance to come in. So total financial assets, $1,087,000. Under liabilities, we have accounts payable and accrued liabilities, $486. Looks like a big number, but for you guys, that's an actual normal number. Policing always comes in 2 months behind, so there's at least 2 months of policing in there. There could be 3 months. Our audit fees are in there. You had all the work you had to do for asset retirement obligations in there, because although you paid for it in 2024, it was a 2023 expense because the report was for 2023. There's some payroll taxes in there that you always pay the month after. So just the timing also makes a difference if you did a check run before Christmas or after Christmas, and the timing of that. So not a concern there. Deferred revenue other. So deferred revenue is cash you've received in your bank account, which also makes your bank account look a little healthier, that is earmarked for a specific project. So in this case, we have OCIF funding of $248,000, NORDS funding of $5,000, and a CHCI grant of $5,000 that makes up that number. So you have received the cash already in your bank account, but you haven't spent it yet. So you have to spend it on an appropriate project in a future period. You're allowed to carry it forward. So it'll become revenue in the year you have a corresponding expenditure. So it sits here until that happens. Deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds. It's a fancy word for gas tax. So that's $128,947. So again, you had received that cash in your bank account, but you had not spent it on an appropriate project. So right now you had $577,000 of cash in the bank. You owed $486 in accounts payable, which usually are paid within a month or two. You had OCIF, NORDS money, and gas tax of $258 and $128. So if you add up those 3 liabilities alone, that's more than your bank balance. So if you had to spend all that money tomorrow, you would have been in the hole at that point. So that's where you're going to start to see cash getting a little bit tight here and there. Especially if you're using some of that government funding towards some projects and things to fund some of your capital, it's going to dwindle your bank balance down, because right now you're technically using that cash to keep your operations afloat. Asset retirement obligation, $673,000. So this is the new number. So this was not here before. It's a big number. For your report, I believe there were 13 asset retirement obligations that were identified by the engineering firm. Some of it being sewer pipes, some being asbestos in buildings, some fuel tanks that need remediation. And what asset retirement obligation is that somewhere in the future, when you decide to sell or demolish an asset that has a legal requirement to be remediated prior to being demolished and or sold. So for example, if you have asbestos in a building, if you were to demolish that building, you are legally required to remove the asbestos prior to demolishing. So what this is doing, and these are accountants far smarter than me who come up with this, that we're supposed to guesstimate when you're going to tear that building down. Now, in Cobalt history, some of these buildings are over 100 years old, but apparently we have to decide when we think you're going to throw it down. So the engineers come up with a useful life of that building and think that, okay, in 50 years from now, you're going to tear it down, and it's going to cost you said dollars in 50 years to tear it down at that point in time and remove the asbestos. So that's what this number is doing, and that's how it's being calculated. So I don't think this is a useful number for you, but it was required to be receiving your government funding. You did not have a choice into doing this because you had to follow the accounting guidelines and regulations, and this was part of those new accounting regulations. The downside to you is now it's adding this really big liability, but this is not due tomorrow. You're not going to be paying anything unless you decide to sell everything and demolish everything. Like some of these are sewer pipes that I'm not sure are ever going to come out of the ground. So I could see maybe the fuel tanks once they need to be replaced or something, but obviously taking away the fuel tanks is going to be part of the cost of putting new ones in. So you're going to budget for it at that point as part of that project. But in the meantime, we're accruing some number here for the eventual cost of doing that. So I'm not sure that in this case, this number is going to be very relevant to you other than add a really big negative to your statement of financial position. But it is required. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Again, you're not dishing out $673,000 tomorrow to remediate all these assets. That liability will only exist when you are ready to demolish it and or do something to that asset. So there is 13. Steve has the full report that I'm assuming council will approve at some point. So you can see at that point, you'll be able to see what those 13 assets are. I think it's just to be more aware of it. So if one of those assets are altered in the future, rather renovated, demolished, that you're aware there could be an asbestos issue or something that you have to deal with. I'm sure you will have somebody inspect the building prior who will also tell you that. So again, not sure this report was overly useful. You shouldn't have to redo the report now that the initial one is done unless something changes. You purchase a new building or an asset that has an asset retirement obligation with it or something, then at that point we'll have to see. But I don't think you're in the market for buying any old buildings at the moment, so I'm not too worried. So that's what that number is. So anybody have any questions about asset retirement obligations? Yes.
The bottom line, this has made our financial position look worse than it really is.
Now, if it makes you feel any better, you're my 5th municipality that I've gotten these in through now. And all 5 of them went, well, except for you guys were already in a net debt position, but all the other ones were financial assets and were in a positive, and this has thrown them all into a big negative. So you're in the same boat as everybody else on that front. You are absolutely correct, yes.
Yeah, it makes me feel better.
So everybody has this big number that is going to hunt them for a little while. But like I said, I wouldn't be too concerned about it. The next note we're going to look at, I actually take that number out so you can see what your true financial position is without it, so that gives you a better idea of where you are. Okay? So your net financial assets less your liabilities gives you your net debt number. And your net debt just means your liabilities are bigger than your assets. But in there you have $673,000 of asset retirement obligations, which we just kind of said to ignore. And then the other number in there is $919,000 of municipal debt. Now that municipal debt works kind of the same way. You're not actually paying it all tomorrow. It is amortized over several years. Your loans on them, some of them are up to 20, 30 years. You're not actually going to pay that in tomorrow's budget. So you're going to be budgeting for that over several years. It's not all due tomorrow. So we will keep that in mind when we look at your financial position as well. So your net debt position right now is $1,380,000, and it's gone down by about $370,000 from last year. So it's gotten worse, but you've paid off some debt. You've got that asset retirement obligation in there. So overall, that's not bad considering you got a hit for $673,000 in 1 year. So now, That net debt number is usually the number we kind of concentrate on. The non-financial assets, if you've heard me talk in the past, I find is also a waste of time. There's a lot of things that are a waste of time in your financial statements. Part of the reason, I don't want you guys to think I'm just, I don't like accountants at the moment, but the rules that we prepare your financial statements under are the exact same rules the federal government has to adhere to. So they do not have a separate set of rules for the federal government versus Town of Cobalt, Village of Thornlow, Township of Breather. So like, the rules just don't work. But nowhere has accountants adopted different rules for smaller municipalities. So you're being lumped in with these accounting rules that might make sense for the federal government, but they don't really make sense for the Town of Cobalt. But to receive your provincial funding and get grants and things like that, you have to prepare your financial statements under these requirements. So you're just going to be stuck with it, unfortunately. And you're not alone. Everybody else in the Twisting District is in the same boat. So it's just the nature of the thing. And that I think that will continue on, unfortunately. So these non-financial assets is another part of your financial statements that I think is misleading. So your tangible capital assets, which is a whopping 50 million, is the largest number on that whole sheet. And it is the original cost less the depreciation of all of the assets in the town. Buildings, roads, sewer, water, vehicles, you name it, it's in there. But it's at historical cost. So what you built the road for 100 years ago is in there at that cost, which is very different than what if you built a road today. So we don't really like to look at this number because it's not very representative of the condition of your assets or the cost of replacing them. So your asset management plan is where we would say you need to rely better on when you're doing your budget and things. It should tell you the condition of your assets, how much it's going to cost you to replace it, not what you paid for it 100 years ago, and how you plan on paying for it. So that would be a much better document to pay attention to than this 15 million, unfortunately. And then that brings you down to a nice accumulated surplus of 14 million. But of that 14, 15 million is assets. So not a very not a good number to base yourself on. That net debt number is actually a better way to, or a better number to look at. Any questions on that? Or did I confuse everybody? Okay, so the next page, excuse me, is page 17, note 15, accumulated surplus. So if you look at the middle or 2/3 down the note, you're going to see that net debt number again. So everybody see that number for 1,380,514 that we just looked at? Just above it, this is where I'm going to back out your asset retirement obligations and I'm going to back out your municipal debt. So those two numbers right above it with brackets, I'm going to back those out. So if we ignore those two numbers from the 1.3, because again, you're not paying that out tomorrow, that leaves you with the 213,371. So that 213,371 is your actual financial position, ignoring debt and asset retirement obligations. So that number there is what allows you to operate. It's the cushion that you have to be able to operate in the following year. If you look at the change from last year to this year, it's 413,000, which is almost identical to your budget-based deficit that you had. So the only differences in the two numbers is prepaid expenses and a few other minor things, but it will swing based on your deficit and your surplus. So as soon as that 213 hits a negative, that's where cash flow is now gone. You've got issues with cash flow and things are tight. So if you have some taxes receivable and lots of payables, you're going to have a hard time making your payables. So you've been slowly dwindling this number down over the past several years with the recurring deficits, because in 2021, your deficit was over 200,000. So it's slowly, you're eating up at that net financial asset position, if you want to call it that. And once you get down to zero, that's where things get tough. So you are very much nearing that number. That 213 is also what allows you to set reserves. Now, in your case, it's a little bit unique. Because if you look at the reserves that are set up, so you have a fire reserve, a library reserve, we'll ignore the deficit for a minute, a library surplus, a cemetery surplus, you have a wetland surplus, and a waterworks surplus. So your sewer and your water make up 559,000 of the 213. So you only have the 213, but 509 is allocated to the sewer. That means that generates a general deficit, which means you're basically using the funds generated from the sewer and water to operate, because you don't actually have enough of a positive position to operate the municipality because your operations have been negative all along. So Right now, thank God, sewer and water are in a positive position because they're holding you up. And that's what's creating cash flow for now. So when you start to see that 213 dwindling down, now you're gonna have a hard time. So that 444 deficit is what you need to start tackling, and that's what's gonna take a while to get to. And from last year to this year, you can see that things have just gotten worse since. And that's been the common trend for the last few years. So those reserves, technically council can allocate as they wish. Some of them are tied to volunteer boards, so I caution you if you touch those. The water and sewer ones are linked to user paid services, so again, those are a little bit limited as well. But it gives you a little bit of an idea of where things sit. So do you really have reserves? About 213, if you were to net them all out to each other. But that's about all you've got. Now, if you're looking at water and sewer, and we'll look at those statements separately in a minute, I think you're okay to hold the line on sewer for a while, but water's got some catching up to do. So even though you had an 8% increase in 2023, your surplus has gone down from 146,000 to 50, which means you're obviously incurring a deficit in the water system as well. But we'll look at the water and the sewer in a minute. Does anybody have questions on that? Did I mix anybody up? Now, reserves and surpluses, you have to remember those are not cash in the bank. There's no extra bank account with 213,000 in it. It's made up of your assets less your liabilities. Right? So it's a net number, and it's made up of taxes receivable, less your accounts payable, plus other accounts receivable, that kind of stuff. So you don't have any extra bank accounts hiding anywhere. No questions? Okay, next page, page 24. So this is the waterworks. So we have sale of water to Cobalt residents, 393,000. Your rate had gone up 8% that year. Sale of water to Coleman, they had a new contract, and they're based on flows and costs of the water system. So a bit of a different formula, but you did get 20,920 from them. Interest charges on collection, about 14,000, and that's for delinquent accounts. We had from federal grants operating, that was gas tax for the water breaks. So total revenues of 482,000. Your salaries and benefits were up slightly. Material supplies and utilities way up. That's the chemicals. So I think 2023 was the first year we had chemicals. Does that make sense, Steve? Yeah. Contracted services down slightly. No capital expenditures. So total expenses 577. So the water had a deficit of 95,000. So even with an 8% rate increase, we still lost money on that one. So that one again, if you did another 8% in 2024, that should help to equalize things out. You dwindled down its accumulated surplus down to about 50,818, so it's slowly dwindling away as well. And in small municipalities like this, water is expensive. You have big water treatment plants, they have lots of requirements, lots of maintenance to be done. That's the nature of it, and you're not the only one. We're seeing it all over the place. It's expensive to run. Questions on that? Next page is the sewer system. So there was no changes to the user fees. So you had 160,000 of charges. We decided to start allocating interest on the sewer portion of your bills as we were able to see what that amount was, and it was starting to make a fairly big difference where it wasn't necessarily being allocated before. So that was 5,860. Provincial grants operating, that was OCIF for a study. Provincial grants capital, that's again OCIF wetlands, but more of the actual capital work that was being done for 52,000. Your salaries and benefits were up slightly from 67 to 72. Your material supplies and utilities were up slightly as well too. Contract services were way down, but you were finishing up a study last year in I think at the beginning of 2023 maybe, and it was mostly in 2022. So the study themselves are not considered capital expenses. They would have been in that contracted services number. So that's why there's a bit of a swing there. Capital expenditures this year about 52,000. So total expenditures 198, and you ended up with a surplus of about 22,000. So that seems like this one is at least turning a positive number. So concentrating on water for now would make sense. Now, is an accumulated surplus of 509 enough for the sewer system? I don't know. If you look at your asset management plan, what do you need to do with the sewer system in the next 10 years? That'll tell you whether or not that number is adequate and whether or not it needs to go up or go down. Okay, questions on that? Okay, so that's it for the financial statements. If anybody has any other questions on anything that we've reviewed. I do have the letter to the management letter. So we've now completed the 2023 audit and consolidated financial statements for the town of Cobalt. The financial statements show an operational deficit of $400,835. Your net debt position continues to grow and is now up to $1.3 million. Overall, your financial position is continuing to deteriorate quickly. Your operating revenues are not covering your operating costs. You have two main options. If you remember, these are the same options in last year's letter because I didn't find any other options. One, increase taxes and water sewer rates to cover the additional operating costs, or two, decrease costs. Both are difficult but necessary to maintain mandatory services. A thorough review of your discretionary services should be conducted if you want to limit tax increases in the future. So as you continue to have pressures on mandatory services, such as water, sewer, plowing, garbage, that kind of stuff that you're required to provide, you're going to have to look pretty closely at your discretionary services, the ones where it's at your option to provide them or not. Because if not, you're going to be seeing double-digit increases for a while until things can catch up. They're difficult decisions to make as a council, but I think it's a process you just have to do and you're going to have to do. Last year, when you budgeted to use from your reserves, you had promised, or I don't know if promised is the word, to do a budget review and a service review at that time. I don't think that's ever been done. So, because we knew there was an issue last year and we had said that taking from reserves was not a good way to go, but you had limited options at the time. So a review was going to be conducted and I don't think that's ever been done. So at some point, I think that's something that just needs to get done and difficult decisions will have to be made. But if you want to continue to operate,
I believe we'll be doing a service review right shortly. It's been on the slate.
Yeah.
So I think that's due to come to the table.
perfect. So that'll be something that I think will be a worthwhile exercise that, and again, it's not going to be easy decision. Not everybody's going to agree on everything, so it's going to get interesting. But I think it'll be a necessary. One thing that I saw another municipality, and again, this is all up to you guys, but another municipality has done, they sent out a survey to ratepayers, and they listed a whole bunch of discretionary services that are not mandatory, and asked what priority they were rating them in. To see what's the most popular. So if you're having to choose one thing over another, what's the most popular option from your ratepayers? Now, whether that's a good representation or not, I don't know, but if you're looking for insight from your ratepayers where, well, if you're going to cut something, don't cut what 90% of the people would have preferred to keep over the other 10% kind of thing, that might give you insight. So you put a little survey in what's your next tax bills or something that would generate a little bit of information from your ratepayers on what they want to see versus maybe not as popular. That might give you some insight on what needs to be better as well, and it might make the cutting of certain things better. Again, it's not going to be an easy thing to do, and I'll commend you for doing it because I don't think you have much choice, but it is going to be difficult thing to do, unfortunately. It's either that or you're going to be seeing large tax increases, and I'm not sure people want that either.
They offer no services anyways.
Yeah, people don't want tax increases for sure.
That's exactly it. So somewhere along the way, you have to find that happy medium, and that happy medium is going to be a difficult one to find. So, are there any questions on this?
No.
Okay, so we do have letters that need to be signed by council members. I know you're brand new tonight, so if you're not comfortable signing them, it's okay.
Nope.
You are not required to, since you were not here for all of these numbers. It makes it hard to say you agree. So I'll pass those around. And then we'll get you to sign them. So by signing these letters, you are approving those financial statements. There's one for the library and one for the town of Health. Remember, the library is in your financial statements along with the town. Pardon me?
I'll sign it.
Oh, you're okay. I wanted to sign it. Pass it that way. A few random questions I do have to ask. Does anybody have any concerns about fraud or financial propriety or anything like that related to the town itself?
each one of these.
Yes, you get to sign 4 times, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I see. I'm sorry.
No,
You
no,
said
that's
pass
okay.
it on.
This is your first time, so you
You
get
said
to
pass
learn.
it on, so.
By next year, you'll be an expert.
Today's the
Yeah.
17th. Yeah, 17th.
The fraud? Yeah, so if anybody ever is aware of fraud or
Thank
any
you.
has concerns about fraud related to anything around the town, we just need to be aware of it.
Oh, okay.
So the council basically acts as the oversight of the administration. So we have to confirm with those who have oversight to make sure that they're not aware of that situation going on that could impact the financial statements. Good question, though. I never have anybody ask me, so.
Yeah, I thought you meant like as our staff or
It could be anything.
businesses?
It could be staff, it would be the town, anything related to the town. So your staff, your assets, your cash, anything like that.
Okay.
That'd be what we would do. Employees, correct. If you see a town truck in somebody's driveway one day, bought a truck and it doesn't have town of Cobalt written on it, but it's in somebody's driveway, that would be something we would want to know. Does anybody know of any lawsuits or other, claims against the municipality or anything that's happened since December 31st that would affect the 2022-3 financial statements? And by lawsuits or claims would be things not covered by insurance or anything new that's happened recently. Nope. Okay, so that's it for the 2023 meeting. I do have a quick 2024 meeting, Stevie. Can I go ahead and do that now? Next year? Okay, so we're already September and we're ready to start next year already. We don't want to get behind. So we do interim work now to try to alleviate the pressures in the new year so we can get your audit done quicker. So we are required to meet with council prior to starting that audit. Now, we won't tell you, but we've already requested a bunch of info from your staff. But we still need to go through some of this. So we do have the engagement letter here. Steve, do you want them to sign tonight, or did you want to pass it at a future meeting, or?
Tonight.
Okay, so the engagement letter basically gives us to do next year's audit. So if you were having fun signing 4 documents, you're about to sign 2 more. If anybody has any questions or concerns about us doing your audit for next year, let me know.
You did an awesome job so far.
I'll pass that around. There's 2 copies. Does anybody have any concerns or questions about our audit process or what we do? No. Materiality. So we have to choose a materiality factor when we're doing the audit of the town. We can't obviously look at every $5 receipt, or we would be here for 6 months and your staff would hate us. So we have to take an amount that we think is considered significant in your decision-making process. So if there was an error of a certain dollar figure, we think that would impact our decision-making. That number for Cobalt is actually 42,000. So if there was an accumulation of errors over 42,000, we think that would impact your decision-making when you're looking at the financial statements. If we had errors that accumulate below that number, we don't think it would actually impact your day-to-day decisions or budget decisions, that kind of stuff. So that's how audits kind of work, is because you can't look at everything. There's an amount that we can kind of feel comfortable with, that we want to make sure the financial statements are correct by that amount. Now, things that we would choose to maybe not fix is if you got an accounts payable or something near the end of the audit that was $10,000, and it's not worth doing a journal entry to get it in the right period because we'll pick it up next year, we may choose not to record it because it's within that 42,000 limit. Okay, so we're supposed to disclose that number to council so you're aware of it. Does anybody have any areas which they believe are higher risk where we should spend more audit time? Does anybody have any knowledge of fraud or any concerns about possible fraud? And again, this is for next year, but I still have to ask. Internal controls, so discussed a little bit a while ago. You do not have a finance department with 10 different people where there's a proper segregation of duties and or controls in place around the finances. So as a council, you are the umbrella and the oversight. You have to make sure you ask questions, you know what's going on. If you are the second signature on a check, make sure you're always reviewing the invoice that goes with it, who the check is made out to, the amount, and that the expenditure relates to obviously a town expenditure, that kind of stuff, or that it makes sense. If you're reviewing reports, ask questions. Make sure you're always comfortable with the numbers and that things make sense. That's it for me. Any other questions before I go?
Thank you very much.
Hopefully it wasn't all Chinese since this was your first day.
Yeah.
We're going to give you a pop quiz next year.
Fortunately, I kind of went over it the past, when I got the papers there, which was about a week ago, and went over the whole thing, and it was like confusing, but
It's
now I
overwhelming.
understand what it was all about.
That's- The idea is that you understand a little bit more every year and that it starts to make sense. For some who have been here for many years, you guys should be experts. You can teach this next time.
Okay.
All right, any other questions before I go? All right, that's it for me then. I'll just pick up the paperwork. I will leave this with Steve and I'll be on my way. And next year, I'm hoping to see you in March. March. I haven't done that in years. But we had nothing preventing us to do that next year.
Yeah.
So pending any staffing issues on my end or any unexpected situations on your end, we should be pretty much, by which should be at
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you very much, very much.
You too?
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Accept it.
Have a good night.
Take care, good night.
Take care.
I have a draft motion. Be it resolved that council receives the 2023 financial statements for the corporation of the town of Cobalt and the Cobalt Public Library as presented by Camp Elliott and Blair LLP. Chartered professional accountants. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Anderson and Councillor Starchuk. Any discussion on the financials that we just received? Councillor?
No.
Okay, we've got some tough decisions to make on our next budget.
Yeah.
And on the service level review that's gonna be coming up. Obviously, we gotta tighten our belts. And so talk to residents and get a feel for what's priority for them and what's not, other than our necessary services. I know we do have some other services. So, and put our creative thinking hats on, think outside the box and see if we can come up with some creative ideas and solutions. Okay?
I'd like to also thank council. I know this budget here, the audit does not reflect the changes for 2024. So what council decided earlier this year with the 13.5. So as Danielle was saying, the hard decisions, but we're taking steps forward that are required at this time.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. 6, adoption of meeting agenda. Draft motion. Be it resolved that council approve the agenda of the regular meeting dated September 17th, 2024 as presented. A mover and a seconder. Okay, Councillor Hughes and Councillor LaFleur.
It's name's not there yet.
Any discussion on the agenda?
Thank you, sir.
Discussion on the agenda.
Yeah,
All in favor? Carried. I wasn't sure how long you'd be, so. 7, adoption of previous council minutes. Draft motion. Be it resolved that council approve the following minutes as presented. August 20th, 2024, regular meeting of council. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Starchuk and Councillor Hughes. Any discussion on the minutes, errors, omissions? All in favor? Carried. 8, staff reports. Draft motion. Be it resolved that council accept staff reports as presented. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Lafleur and Councillor Anderson. Okay, we'll keep the discussion on a point-by-point basis. We'll go down the reports one at a time. 8.1, Public Works, September 2024. Anybody need anything clarified? No?
Your worship. Just like to speak about Public Works here. Since this was created until now, since the agenda went out, the work on the Classic Theater, there is going to be a meeting next week with the engineering as well as the insurance company and as well as some contractors. So we're moving forward with that. So I just wanted to put that into council's ear as well, since we didn't have time to get on here, but no, it needs to be mentioned there. So they're looking at coming by. It would be September 24th for a site meeting.
Now, is that to just take a look at the opening over the door, whatever you call it, the valance or whatever? Or
This is
that
a
to look
roof.
at the roof and the footings and everything?
Well, this is directly to the roof right now as per the insurance company. So
8.2, bylaw enforcement, August 2024. Any clarification required? 8.3, Cobalt Public Library minutes, June 22nd, 2024 minutes. No questions, clarifications? 8.4, staff report 2024-09, 1701, bylaw 2024-33, fire department communication agreement.
Your worship, can I speak on that?
Yep.
There was a previous fire department communication systems with a lot of the municipalities here. It actually ended in 2020, COVID, and it never has been updated since. So when they came about, sent us a draft of it to go over, as well as with the other municipalities. I did bring this to Chief Hearn's attention, and he endorses it for this communications.
Is there more information for council about this?
There is a bylaw. Yeah.
Okay. 8.5, staff report 2024-09-1702, bylaw 2024-35, deeming bylaw, Lang Street.
This is actually for 14 and 16 Lang Street, so this is behind where the old CIBC building was. This here was brought to our planner's attention as well for the deeming bylaw. And what is the purpose is the applicant is requesting to deem 2 subdivision lots in order to allow the lots to merge to increase the property area for future development. And the recommendation from our planner was it's recommended that the application be approved and a deeming bylaw be passed for the subject priority or property, sorry.
That'll make it easier to build something a little more substantial.
Decent size.
Okay. 8.6, staff, oh, sorry, Councillor Hughes.
Do we have a final say on what is to be built there? Like if the guy wants to just build a 1-unit house or a 6-plex?
No. We have no control over what anybody puts on their property other than it has to be within the zoning bylaw or the building code. Okay. 8.6, staff report 2024-09-1703, bylaw 2024-36, amendment number 3 to user fee bylaw 2023-33.
Your worship?
Yeah.
This is to come about for some cost recovery here for administration. This is not trying to grab anything. So the removal of a heritage designation application, it will not be applied to this one here, but for future, fee of $750 because we have to put 2 advertisements out into our newspaper, which costs and then some administration as well as other items. So this is just to recoup the costs involved.
Okay.
So you said it wouldn't be
this time?
It won't be applied to this application.
Okay. 8.7, staff report 2024-09-1704, bylaw 2024-37, repeal bylaw 79-9, heritage designation 34 Cobalt Street.
This is what was brought approximately to our July meeting about the request for the removal of the heritage designation. At that time, that was brought forward to council. This is for the United Church Mass. So this is just to continue on with it, and there's still more process after this deeming bylaw. Or for the request, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's just to remove the heritage
Yeah.
designation. To repeal the bylaw that designated it.
That's just the church that was there, right? And then the guy turned it into a canoe building place at one time?
No, it's for the
At one time, this is for the manse, the house beside it.
Oh, the house beside it, okay, I apologize, okay. Thanks for clarification.
Okay. So all in favor? Carried. 9, items for council consideration. Classic, 9.1, Classic Theater extension of arrangements. Draft motion, whereas at the December 19th, 2023 regular meeting, council passed resolution 2023-288 that stated the following, that the Classic Theater arrangements remain as status quo until April 30th, 2024, with the Classic Theater paying the security monitoring services. And whereas the Classic Theater Board has requested an extension of the status quo to cover the 25-26 season, therefore be it resolved that council approve the extension and will review the policy at the end of Q1 2025. There, so I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Starchuk. Any discussion?
Speaking with the Classic Theater Board, they are trying to schedule some events coming up. And we do know with the roof, it's been kind of an ongoing issue of trying to solidify, get contractors, everything here, but they are still trying to set up shows and that. So this was their request to continue on as is for now, because they've already started advertising for events going into well into next year.
Okay. Anybody have any? All in favor? Carried. 9.2, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Council Training. Draft motion, be it resolved that council directs staff and by the municipality's municipal advisor from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to a special meeting on Tuesday, October 29th, 2024 to provide council training. Need a mover and a seconder? Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Lafleur. Any discussion?
I was speaking with Sarah Cormier. She was here earlier in the year as part of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. She has offered free training for council and any questions that council may have at that time. So, but they need to be requested to attend. So I was in contact with her over the last few weeks.
It's gonna be my question of the cost, anything. I heard the word free, so that's good.
All in favor? Carried. Let's mark the date on your calendars. Items for council information, or 10, items for council information. Draft motion, be it resolved that council accept the items for council information as presented. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Starchuk. 10.1, Ontario Northland, Notice of Studies in Cobalt. Any discussion? Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the historic study has been waiting a long, long time for Ontario Northland to do this so that they can continue on with the two sites that are on the Heritage Silver Trails.
All in favor? Carried. 11, bylaws and agreements. 11.1, bylaw 2024-33, fire department communication agreement. We already have the staff report, 2024-09-17-01. Draft motion, whereas council received staff report 2024-09-17-01 with a recommendation to adopt bylaw 2024-33. Now therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2024-33, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement with other municipalities for the purchase and joint maintenance of fire department communication system, be taken as read a first, second, third time, and finally passed the 17th day of September 2024. And further, that the said bylaw be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Lafleur, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Carried. 11.2, bylaw 2024-35, being a deeming bylaw under section 50-4 of the Planning Act. Staff report 2024-09-17-02 that we've already received. Draft motion, whereas section 50-4 of the Planning Act enables council to pass a bylaw to deem certain lands a registered plan subdivision to not be within a plan of subdivision. And whereas the effect of the deeming land to no longer be part of a planned subdivision will have the effect of merging said lands, should they be abutting and in the same ownership. And whereas the owner of the land specified in this bylaw has requested that council deem said lands to no longer be in a plan of subdivision, knowing the effects of the bylaw on the lands. And whereas council received staff report 2024-09-17-02 with a recommendation to adopt bylaw 2024-35. Now therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2024-35, being a deeming bylaw under section 50-4 of the Planning Act, be taken as read a first, second, and third time, and finally pass the 17th day of September 2024. And further, that said bylaw be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Starchuk, any discussion? All in favor? Carried. 11.3, bylaw 2024-36, amendment number 3 to user fee bylaw 2023-33. Staff report 2024-09-17-03, we've already received. Draft motion, whereas council received staff report 2024-09-17-03 with a recommendation to amend Schedule D of user fee bylaw 2023-33. Now therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2024-36, being a bylaw to adopt amendment number 3 to user fee bylaw 2023-33, be taken as read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed the 17th day of September 2024. And further, that the said bylaw be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Anderson, Councillor Hughes, any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Sorry, can't get the page to turn. 11.4, bylaw 2024-37 to repeal bylaw 79-9, heritage designation for 34 Cobalt Street. Staff report 2024-09-17-04 that we've already received. Draft motion, whereas the town of Cobalt passed bylaw 79-9 designating 34 Cobalt Street as being of architectural value or interest. And whereas the clerk for the town of Cobalt has received an application to repeal the heritage designation at 34 Cobalt Street. And whereas council received staff report 2024-09-17-04, and it is deemed desirable by council to repeal bylaw 79.9 to remove the heritage designation at 34 Cobalt Street. Now therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2024-37 to repeal bylaw 79-9, there's an error in there, it says -79, to designate the property municipally known as the Cobalt United Church Manse, 34 Cobalt Street, as being of architectural value or interest as a heritage property under the terms of Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act 1974, SO Chapter 122 be taken as read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed the 17th day of September 2024. And further, that the said bylaw be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilcox and Councillor Lafleur. Any discussion? All in favor? 12, unfinished business. There is none. 13, new business. 13.1, schedule of accounts. Draft motion, be it resolved that council receives the following schedules as presented. Schedule number 2024-16 in the amount of $110,886.95. Schedule number 2024-17 in the amount of $191,543.61. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Anderson. Any discussion? Questions? No? All in favor? Oh, was that a question or all in favor?
All in favor.
Okay, all in favor? Try it again. Carried. 14, mayor's report. Other than, I don't know how else to get the message out there. People, please don't put your dogs out at 4 and 5 in the morning and let them bark and wake up everybody in your neighborhood. Also had an incident on the weekend that I'd like to make people aware of. If you're calling 911 and you do not want your name and address going out over the radio, tell them you want to be anonymous when you call the dispatch. So, I was advised of that. And we're still waiting for some information on our OPP board. Councillor Wilcox.
Just as an aside to that, I had occasion to call 911 once, and one of the neighbors who was a fire department member was kind enough to come over and see if he could help initially before anybody else arrived. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to have your name out there.
And sometimes it puts a target on you and you don't want to target.
Sometimes.
We've had a lot of people walking the streets at night. Late.
Yeah, anyway, so again, those are pretty much all I've got at this point. I'd like the public to be patient with us while we go through the service level bylaw. And we look at where we have to tighten our belts so that we can not increase taxes as much as we don't want to, because we're all ratepayers as well. So any increase, we're paying it as well. Okay. 15, closed meeting, draft motion, be it resolved that council convene in closed session as per section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended in order to address a matter pertaining to subsection 2-I, a trade secret or scientific, technical, commercial, financial, or labor relations information supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board. Need a mover and a seconder. Councillor LaFleur and Councillor Anderson, all in favor? Carried. Okay, we are going to take a 10-minute recess, and we will not be resuming video after we come out of closed.